Paper 190. Urantia, Appearances of Jesus. The resurrected Jesus now prepares to spend a short period on Urantia for the purpose of experiencing the ascending Urantia career of a mortal of the realms. Although this time of the Urantia life is to be spent on the world of his mortal incarnation, it will, however, be in all respects the counterpart of the experience of Satania mortals who pass through the progressive Urantia life of the seven mansion worlds of Jerusalem. All this power which is inherent in Jesus, the endowment of life, and which enabled him to rise from the dead, is the very gift of eternal life which he bestows upon kingdom believers, and which even now makes certain their resurrection from the bonds of natural death. The mortals of the realms will arise in the morning of the resurrection with the same type of transition or Urantia body that Jesus had when he arose from the tomb on this Sunday morning. These bodies do not have circulating blood, and such beings do not partake of ordinary material food. Nevertheless, these Urantia forms are real. When the various believers saw Jesus after his resurrection, they really saw him. They were not the self-deceived victims of visions or hallucinations. Abiding faith in the resurrection of Jesus was the cardinal feature of the faith of all branches of the early gospel teaching. In Jerusalem, Alexandria, Antioch, and Philadelphia, all the gospel teachers united in this implicit faith in the Master's resurrection. In viewing the prominent part which Mary Magdalene took in proclaiming the Master's resurrection, it should be recorded that Mary was the chief spokesman for the women's corps, as was Peter for the apostles. Mary was not chief of the women workers, but she was their chief teacher and public spokesman. Mary had become a woman of great circumspection, so that her boldness in speaking to a man whom she considered to be the caretaker of Joseph's garden only indicates how horrified she was to find the tomb empty. It was the depth and agony of her love, the fullness of her devotion, that caused her to forget for a moment the conventional restraints of a Jewish woman's approach to a strange man. 1. Heralds of the Resurrection. The apostles did not want Jesus to leave them. Therefore had they slighted all his statements about dying, along with his promises to rise again. They were not expecting the resurrection as it came, and they refused to believe until they were confronted with the compulsion of unimpeachable evidence and the absolute proof of their own experiences. When the apostles refused to believe the report of the 5 women who represented that they had seen Jesus and talked with him, Mary Magdalene returned to the tomb, and the others went back to Joseph's house, where they related their experiences to his daughter and the other women. And the women believed their report. Shortly after 6 o'clock, the daughter of Joseph of Arimathea and the 4 women who had seen Jesus went over to the home of Nicodemus, where they related all these happenings to Joseph, Nicodemus, David Zebedee, and the other men there assembled. Nicodemus and the others doubted their story, doubted that Jesus had risen from the dead. They conjectured that the Jews had removed the body. Joseph and David were disposed to believe the report, so much so that they hurried out to inspect the tomb, and they found everything just as the women had described. And they were the last to so view the sepulchre, for the high priest sent the captain of the temple guards to the tomb at 7:30 o'clock to remove the grave cloths. The captain wrapped them all up in the linen sheet and threw them over a nearby cliff. From the tomb, David and Joseph went immediately to the home of Elijah Mark, where they held a conference with the 10 apostles in the upper chamber. Only John Zebedee was disposed to believe, even faintly, that Jesus had risen from the dead. Peter had believed at first, but when he failed to find the Master, fell into grave doubting. They were all disposed to believe that the Jews had removed the body. David would not argue with them, but when he left, he said, "You are the apostles, and you ought to understand these things. I will not contend with you. Nevertheless, I now go back to the home of Nicodemus, where I have appointed with the messengers to assemble this morning, and when they have gathered together, I will send them forth on their last mission, as heralds of the Master's resurrection. I heard the Master say that after he should die, he would rise on the third day, and I believe him." And thus speaking to the dejected and forlorn ambassadors of the kingdom, this self-appointed chief of communication and intelligence took leave of the apostles. On his way from the upper chamber, he dropped the bag of Judas containing all the apostolic funds in the lap of Matthew Levi. It was about 9:30 when the last of David's 26 messengers arrived at the home of Nicodemus. David promptly assembled them in the spacious courtyard and addressed them. "Men and brethren, all this time you have served me in accordance with your oath to me and to one another, and I call you to witness that I have never yet sent out false information at your hands. I am about to send you on your last mission as volunteer messengers of the kingdom, and in so doing I release you from your oaths and thereby disband the messenger corps. Men, I declare to you that we have finished our work. No more does the Master have need of mortal messengers. He has risen from the dead. He told us before they arrested him that he would die and rise again on the third day. I have seen the tomb. It is empty. I have talked with Mary Magdalene and 4 other women who have talked with Jesus. I now disband you, bid you farewell, and send you on your respective assignments, and the message which you shall bear to the believers is, Jesus has risen from the dead. The tomb is empty." The majority of those present endeavored to persuade David not to do this, but they could not influence him. They then sought to dissuade the messengers, but they would not heed the words of doubt. And so, shortly before 10 o'clock this Sunday morning, these 26 runners went forth as the first heralds of the mighty truth-fact of the resurrected Jesus. And they started out on this mission as they had on so many others, in fulfillment of their oath to David Zebedee and to one another. These men had great confidence in David. They departed on this assignment without even tarrying to talk with those who had seen Jesus. They took David at his word. The majority of them believed what David had told them, and even those who somewhat doubted carried the message just as certainly and just as swiftly. The apostles, the spiritual core of the kingdom, are this day assembled in the upper chamber, where they manifest fear and express doubts, while these laymen, representing the first attempt at the socialization of the Master's gospel of the brotherhood of man, under the orders of their fearless and efficient leader, go forth to proclaim the risen Savior of a world and a universe. And they engage in this eventful service ere his chosen representatives are willing to believe his word or to accept the evidence of eyewitnesses. These 26 were dispatched to the home of Lazarus in Bethany, and to all of the believer centers, from Beersheba in the south to Damascus and Sidon in the north, and from Philadelphia in the east to Alexandria in the west. When David had taken leave of his brethren, he went over to the home of Joseph for his mother, and they then went out to Bethany to join the waiting family of Jesus. David abode there in Bethany with Martha and Mary until after they had disposed of their earthly possessions, and he accompanied them on their journey to join their brother Lazarus at Philadelphia. In about 1 week from this time, John Zebedee took Mary, the mother of Jesus, to his home in Bethsaida. James, Jesus' eldest brother, remained with his family in Jerusalem. Ruth remained at Bethany with Lazarus' sisters. The rest of Jesus' family returned to Galilee. David Zebedee left Bethany with Martha and Mary for Philadelphia early in June, the day after his marriage to Ruth, Jesus' youngest sister. 2. Jesus' appearance at Bethany. From the time of the Urantia resurrection until the hour of his spirit ascension on high, Jesus made 19 separate appearances in visible form to his believers on earth. He did not appear to his enemies nor to those who could not make spiritual use of his manifestation in visible form. His first appearance was to the 5 women at the tomb. His second, to Mary Magdalene, also at the tomb. The third appearance occurred about noon of this Sunday at Bethany. Shortly after noontide, Jesus' oldest brother, James, was standing in the garden of Lazarus before the empty tomb of the resurrected brother of Martha and Mary, turning over in his mind the news brought to them about 1 hour previously by the messenger of David. James had always inclined to believe in his eldest brother's mission on earth, but he had long since lost contact with Jesus' work and had drifted into grave doubting regarding the later claims of the apostles that Jesus was the Messiah. The whole family was startled and well-nigh confounded by the news brought by the messenger. Even as James stood before Lazarus's empty tomb, Mary Magdalene arrived on the scene and was excitedly relating to the family her experiences of the early morning hours at the tomb of Joseph. Before she had finished, David Zebedee and his mother arrived. Ruth, of course, believed the report, and so did Jude after he had talked with David and Salome. In the meantime, as they looked for James and before they found him, while he stood there in the garden near the tomb, he became aware of a nearby presence, as if someone had touched him on the shoulder, and when he turned to look, he beheld the gradual appearance of a strange form by his side. He was too much amazed to speak and too frightened to flee. And then the strange form spoke, saying, "James, I come to call you to the service of the kingdom. Join earnest hands with your brethren and follow after me." When James heard his name spoken, he knew that it was his eldest brother Jesus who had addressed him. They all had more or less difficulty in recognizing the Urantia form of the Master, but few of them had any trouble recognizing his voice or otherwise identifying his charming personality when he once began to communicate with them. When James perceived that Jesus was addressing him, he started to fall to his knees, exclaiming, "My father and my brother." But Jesus bade him stand while he spoke with him, and they walked through the garden and talked for almost 3 minutes, talked over experiences of former days, and forecast the events of the near future. As they neared the house, Jesus said, "Farewell, James, until I greet you all together." James rushed into the house, even while they looked for him at Bethphage, exclaiming, "I have just seen Jesus and talked with him, visited with him. He is not dead, he is risen. He vanished before me, saying, 'Farewell until I greet you all together.'" He had scarcely finished speaking when Jude returned, and he retold the experience of meeting Jesus in the garden for the benefit of Jude, and they all began to believe in the resurrection of Jesus. James now announced that he would not return to Galilee, and David exclaimed, "He is seen not only by excited women, even strong-hearted men have begun to see him. I expect to see him myself." And David did not long wait, for the 4th appearance of Jesus to mortal recognition occurred shortly before 2 o'clock in this very home of Martha and Mary, when he appeared visibly before his earthly family and their friends, 20 in all. The Master appeared in the open back door, saying, "Peace be upon you. Greetings to those once near me in the flesh, and fellowship for my brothers and sisters in the kingdom of heaven. How could you doubt? Why have you lingered so long before choosing to follow the light of truth with a whole heart? Come, therefore, all of you into the fellowship of the Spirit of truth in the Father's kingdom." As they began to recover from the first shock of their amazement and to move toward him as if to embrace him, he vanished from their sight. They all wanted to rush off to the city to tell the doubting apostles about what had happened, but James restrained them. Mary Magdalene only was permitted to return to Joseph's house. James forbade their publishing abroad the fact of this Urantia visit because of certain things which Jesus had said to him as they conversed in the garden. But James never revealed more of his visit with the risen Master on this day at the Lazarus home in Bethany. 3. At the home of Joseph. The 5th Urantia manifestation of Jesus to the recognition of mortal eyes occurred in the presence of some 25 women believers, assembled at the home of Joseph of Arimathea at about 15 minutes past 4 o'clock on this same Sunday afternoon. Mary Magdalene had returned to Joseph's house just a few minutes before this appearance. James, Jesus' brother, had requested that nothing be said to the apostles concerning the Master's appearance at Bethany. He had not asked Mary to refrain from reporting the occurrence to her sister believers. Accordingly, after Mary had pledged all the women to secrecy, she proceeded to relate what had so recently happened while she was with Jesus' family at Bethany. And she was in the very midst of this thrilling recital when a sudden and solemn hush fell over them. They beheld in their very midst the fully visible form of the risen Jesus. He greeted them, saying, "Peace be upon you. In the fellowship of the kingdom there shall be neither Jew nor Gentile, rich nor poor, free nor bond, man nor woman. You also are called to publish the good news of the liberty of mankind through the gospel of sonship with God in the kingdom of heaven. Go to all the world, proclaiming this gospel and confirming believers in the faith thereof. And while you do this, forget not to minister to the sick and strengthen those who are faint-hearted and fear-ridden. And I will be with you always, even to the ends of the earth." And when he had thus spoken, he vanished from their sight, while the women fell on their faces and worshipped in silence. Of the 5 Urantia appearances of Jesus occurring up to this time, Mary Magdalene had witnessed 4. As a result of sending out the messengers during the mid-forenoon, and from the unconscious leakage of intimations concerning this appearance of Jesus at Joseph's house, word began to come to the rulers of the Jews during the early evening that it was being reported about the city that Jesus had risen, and that many persons were claiming to have seen him. The Sanhedrists were thoroughly aroused by these rumors. After a hasty consultation with Annas, Caiaphas called a meeting of the Sanhedrin to convene at 8 o'clock that evening. It was at this meeting that action was taken to throw out of the synagogues any person who made mention of Jesus' resurrection. It was even suggested that anyone claiming to have seen him should be put to death. This proposal, however, did not come to a vote, since the meeting broke up in confusion bordering on actual panic. They had dared to think they were through with Jesus. They were about to discover that their real trouble with the man of Nazareth had just begun. 4. Appearance to the Greeks. About 4 o'clock, at the home of one Flavius, the Master made his 6th Urantia appearance to some 40 Greek believers there assembled. While they were engaged in discussing the reports of the Master's resurrection, he manifested himself in their midst, notwithstanding that the doors were securely fastened, and speaking to them said, "Peace be upon you. While the Son of Man appeared on earth among the Jews, he came to minister to all men. In the kingdom of my Father there shall be neither Jew nor Gentile. You will all be brethren, the sons of God. Go you, therefore, to all the world, proclaiming this gospel of salvation as you have received it from the ambassadors of the kingdom. And I will fellowship you in the brotherhood of the Father's sons of faith and truth." And when he had thus charged them, he took leave, and they saw him no more. They remained within the house all evening. They were too much overcome with awe and fear to venture forth. Neither did any of these Greeks sleep that night. They stayed awake discussing these things and hoping that the Master might again visit them. Among this group were many of the Greeks who were at Gethsemane when the soldiers arrested Jesus and Judas betrayed him with a kiss. Rumors of Jesus' resurrection and reports concerning the many appearances to his followers are spreading rapidly, and the whole city is being wrought up to a high pitch of excitement. Already the Master has appeared to his family, to the women, and to the Greeks, and presently he manifests himself in the midst of the apostles. The Sanhedrin is soon to begin the consideration of these new problems which have been so suddenly thrust upon the Jewish rulers. Jesus thinks much about his apostles, but desires that they be left alone for a few more hours of solemn reflection and thoughtful consideration before he visits them. 5. The Walk with Two Brothers. At Emmaus, about 7 miles west of Jerusalem, there lived two brothers, shepherds, who had spent the Passover week in Jerusalem, attending upon the sacrifices, ceremonials, and feasts. Cleopas, the elder, was a partial believer in Jesus. At least he had been cast out of the synagogue. His brother, Jacob, was not a believer, although he was much intrigued by what he had heard about the Master's teachings and works. On this Sunday afternoon, about 3 miles out of Jerusalem, and a few minutes before 5 o'clock, as these two brothers trudged along the road to Emmaus, they talked in great earnestness about Jesus, his teachings, work, and more especially concerning the rumors that his tomb was empty, and that certain of the women had talked with him. Cleopas was half a mind to believe these reports, but Jacob was insistent that the whole affair was probably a fraud. While they thus argued and debated as they made their way toward home, the Urantia manifestation of Jesus, his 7th appearance, came alongside them as they journeyed on. Cleopas had often heard Jesus teach, and had eaten with him at the homes of Jerusalem believers on several occasions, but he did not recognize the Master even when he spoke freely with them. After walking a short way with them, Jesus said, "What were the words you exchanged so earnestly as I came upon you?" And when Jesus had spoken, they stood still and viewed him with sad surprise. Said Cleopas, "Can it be that you sojourn in Jerusalem and know not the things which have recently happened?" Then asked the Master, "What things?" Cleopas replied, "If you do not know about these matters, you are the only one in Jerusalem who has not heard these rumors concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in word and in deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers delivered him up to the Romans and demanded that they crucify him. Now many of us had hoped that it was he who would deliver Israel from the yoke of the Gentiles. But that is not all. It is now the 3rd day since he was crucified, and certain women have this day amazed us by declaring that very early this morning they went to his tomb and found it empty. And these same women insist that they talked with this man. They maintain that he has risen from the dead. And when the women reported this to the men, 2 of his apostles ran to the tomb and likewise found it empty." And here Jacob interrupted his brother to say, "But they did not see Jesus." As they walked along, Jesus said to them, "How slow you are to comprehend the truth. When you tell me that it is about the teachings and work of this man that you have your discussions, then may I enlighten you, since I am more than familiar with these teachings. Do you not remember that this Jesus always taught that his kingdom was not of this world, and that all men, being the sons of God, should find liberty and freedom in the spiritual joy of the fellowship of the brotherhood of loving service in this new kingdom of the truth of the Heavenly Father's love? Do you not recall how this Son of Man proclaimed the salvation of God for all men, ministering to the sick and afflicted, and setting free those who were bound by fear and enslaved by evil? Do you not know that this man of Nazareth told his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem, be delivered up to his enemies, who would put him to death, and that he would arise on the 3rd day? Have you not been told all this? And have you never read in the Scriptures concerning this day of salvation for Jew and Gentile, where it says that in him shall all the families of the earth be blessed, that he will hear the cry of the needy and save the souls of the poor who seek him, that all nations shall call him blessed, that such a deliverer shall be as the shadow of a great rock in a weary land, that he will feed the flock like a true shepherd, gathering the lambs in his arms and tenderly carrying them in his bosom, that he will open the eyes of the spiritually blind and bring the prisoners of despair out into full liberty and light, that all who sit in darkness shall see the great light of eternal salvation, that he will bind up the broken-hearted, proclaim liberty to the captives of sin, and open up the prison to those who are enslaved by fear and bound by evil, that he will comfort those who mourn, and bestow upon them the joy of salvation in the place of sorrow and heaviness, that he shall be the desire of all nations, and the everlasting joy of those who seek righteousness, that this Son of truth and righteousness shall rise upon the world with healing light and saving power, even that he will save his people from their sins, that he will really seek and save those who are lost, that he will not destroy the weak, but minister salvation to all who hunger and thirst for righteousness, that those who believe in him shall have eternal life, that he will pour out his Spirit upon all flesh, and that this Spirit of truth shall be in each believer a well of water, springing up into everlasting life. Did you not understand how great was the gospel of the kingdom which this man delivered to you? Do you not perceive how great a salvation has come upon you?" By this time they had come near to the village where these brothers dwelt. Not a word had these two men spoken since Jesus began to teach them as they walked along the way. Soon they drew up in front of their humble dwelling place, and Jesus was about to take leave of them, going on down the road, but they constrained him to come in and abide with them. They insisted that it was near nightfall, and that he tarry with them. Finally Jesus consented, and very soon after they went into the house they sat down to eat. They gave him the bread to bless, and as he began to break and hand to them, their eyes were opened, and Cleopas recognized that their guest was the Master himself. And when he said, "It is the Master," the Urantia Jesus vanished from their sight. And then they said the one to the other, "No wonder our hearts burned within us as he spoke to us while we walked along the road, and while he opened up to our understanding the teachings of the Scriptures." They would not stop to eat. They had seen the Urantia Master, and they rushed from the house, hastening back to Jerusalem to spread the good news of the risen Savior. About 9 o'clock that evening, and just before the Master appeared to the 10, these two excited brothers broke in upon the apostles in the upper chamber, declaring that they had seen Jesus and talked with him. And they told all that Jesus had said to them, and how they had not discerned who he was until the time of the breaking of the bread.
Paper 191. Appearances to the Apostles and Other Leaders. Resurrection Sunday was a terrible day in the lives of the apostles. 10 of them spent the larger part of the day in the upper chamber behind barred doors. They might have fled from Jerusalem, but they were afraid of being arrested by the agents of the Sanhedrin if they were found abroad. Thomas was brooding over his troubles alone at Bethphage. He would have fared better had he remained with his fellow apostles, and he would have aided them to direct their discussions along more helpful lines. All day long John upheld the idea that Jesus had risen from the dead. He recounted no less than 5 different times when the Master had affirmed he would rise again, and at least 3 times when he alluded to the 3rd day. John's attitude had considerable influence on them, especially on his brother James and on Nathanael. John would have influenced them more if he had not been the youngest member of the group. Their isolation had much to do with their troubles. John Mark kept them in touch with developments about the temple and informed them as to the many rumors gaining headway in the city. But it did not occur to him to gather up news from the different groups of believers to whom Jesus had already appeared. That was the kind of service which had heretofore been rendered by the messengers of David, but they were all absent on their last assignment as heralds of the resurrection to those groups of believers who dwelt remote from Jerusalem. For the first time in all these years the apostles realized how much they had been dependent on David's messengers for their daily information regarding the affairs of the kingdom. All this day Peter characteristically vacillated emotionally between faith and doubt concerning the Master's resurrection. Peter could not get away from the sight of the grave cloths resting there in the tomb, as if the body of Jesus had just evaporated from within. But, reasoned Peter, if he has risen and can show himself to the women, why does he not show himself to us, his apostles? Peter would grow sorrowful when he thought that maybe Jesus did not come to them on account of his presence among the apostles, because he had denied him that night in Annas' courtyard. And then would he cheer himself with the word brought by the women, "Go tell my apostles and Peter." But to derive encouragement from this message implied that he must believe that the women had really seen and heard the risen Master. Thus Peter alternated between faith and doubt throughout the whole day, until a little after 8 o'clock, when he ventured out into the courtyard. Peter thought to remove himself from among the apostles, so that he might not prevent Jesus coming to them because of his denial of the Master. James Zebedee at first advocated that they all go to the tomb. He was strongly in favor of doing something to get to the bottom of the mystery. It was Nathanael who prevented them from going out in public in response to James's urging, and he did this by reminding them of Jesus' warning against unduly jeopardizing their lives at this time. By noontime, James had settled down with the others to watchful waiting. He said little. He was tremendously disappointed because Jesus did not appear to them, and he did not know of the Master's many appearances to other groups and individuals. Andrew did much listening this day. He was exceedingly perplexed by the situation, and had more than his share of doubts, but he at least enjoyed a certain sense of freedom from responsibility for the guidance of his fellow apostles. He was indeed grateful that the Master had released him from the burdens of leadership before they fell upon these distracting times. More than once during the long and weary hours of this tragic day, the only sustaining influence of the group was the frequent contribution of Nathanael's characteristic philosophic counsel. He was really the controlling influence among the 10 throughout the entire day. Never once did he express himself concerning either belief or disbelief in the Master's resurrection. But as the day wore on, he became increasingly inclined toward believing that Jesus had fulfilled his promise to rise again. Simon Zelotes was too much crushed to participate in the discussions. Most of the time he reclined on a couch in a corner of the room with his face to the wall. He did not speak half a dozen times throughout the whole day. His concept of the kingdom had crashed, and he could not discern that the Master's resurrection could materially change the situation. His disappointment was very personal and altogether too keen to be recovered from on short notice, even in the face of such a stupendous fact as the resurrection. Strange to record, the usually inexpressive Philip did much talking throughout the afternoon of this day. During the forenoon he had little to say, but all afternoon he asked questions of the other apostles. Peter was often annoyed by Philip's questions, but the others took his inquiries good-naturedly. Philip was particularly desirous of knowing, provided Jesus had really risen from the grave, whether his body would bear the physical marks of the crucifixion. Matthew was highly confused. He listened to the discussions of his fellows, but spent most of the time turning over in his mind the problem of their future finances. Regardless of Jesus' supposed resurrection, Judas was gone. David had unceremoniously turned the funds over to him, and they were without an authoritative leader. Before Matthew got around to giving serious consideration to their arguments about the resurrection, he had already seen the Master face to face. The Alphaeus twins took little part in these serious discussions. They were fairly busy with their customary ministrations. One of them expressed the attitude of both when he said in reply to a question asked by Philip, "We do not understand about the resurrection, but our mother says she talked with the Master, and we believe her." Thomas was in the midst of one of his typical spells of despairing depression. He slept a portion of the day and walked over the hills the rest of the time. He felt the urge to rejoin his fellow apostles, but the desire to be by himself was the stronger. The Master put off the first Urantia appearance to the apostles for a number of reasons. First, he wanted them to have time, after they heard of his resurrection, to think well over what he had told them about his death and resurrection when he was still with them in the flesh. The Master wanted Peter to wrestle through with some of his peculiar difficulties before he manifested himself to them all. In the second place, he desired that Thomas should be with them at the time of his first appearance. John Mark located Thomas at the home of Simon in Bethphage early this Sunday morning, bringing word to the effect to the apostles about 11 o'clock. Any time during this day Thomas would have gone back to them if Nathanael or any two of the other apostles had gone for him. He really wanted to return, but having left as he did the evening before, he was too proud to go back of his own accord so soon. By the next day he was so depressed that it required almost a week for him to make up his mind to return. The apostles waited for him, and he waited for his brethren to seek him out and ask him to come back to them. Thomas thus remained away from his associates until the next Saturday evening, when, after darkness had come on, Peter and John went over to Bethphage and brought him back with them. And this is also the reason why they did not go at once to Galilee after Jesus first appeared to them. They would not go without Thomas. 1. The appearance to Peter. It was near 8:30 o'clock this Sunday evening when Jesus appeared to Simon Peter in the garden of the Mark home. This was his 8th Urantia manifestation. Peter had lived under a heavy burden of doubt and guilt ever since his denial of the Master. All day Saturday and this Sunday he had fought the fear that perhaps he was no longer an apostle. He had shuddered at the fate of Judas, and even thought that he too had betrayed his Master. All this afternoon he thought that it might be his presence with the apostles that prevented Jesus appearing to them, provided, of course, he had really risen from the dead. And it was to Peter in such a frame of mind and in such a state of soul that Jesus appeared as the dejected apostle strolled among the flowers and shrubs. When Peter thought of the loving look of the Master as he passed by on Annas' porch, and as he turned over in his mind that wonderful message brought him early that morning by the women who came from the empty tomb, "Go tell my apostles and Peter," as he contemplated these tokens of mercy, his faith began to surmount his doubts, and he stood still, clenching his fists, while he spoke aloud, "I believe he has risen from the dead. I will go and tell my brethren." And as he said this, there suddenly appeared in front of him the form of a man who spoke to him in familiar tones, saying, "Peter, the enemy desired to have you, but I would not give you up. I knew it was not from the heart that you disowned me. Therefore I forgave you even before you asked. But now must you cease to think about yourself and the troubles of the hour while you prepare to carry the good news of the gospel to those who sit in darkness. No longer should you be concerned with what you may obtain from the kingdom, but rather be exercised about what you can give to those who live in dire spiritual poverty. Gird yourself, Simon, for the battle of a new day, the struggle with spiritual darkness and the evil doubtings of the natural minds of men." Peter and the Urantia Jesus walked through the garden and talked of things past, present, and future for almost 5 minutes. Then the Master vanished from his gaze, saying, "Farewell, Peter, until I see you with your brethren." For a moment, Peter was overcome by the realization that he had talked with the risen Master, and that he could be sure he was still an ambassador of the kingdom. He had just heard the glorified Master exhort him to go on preaching the gospel, and with all this welling up within his heart, he rushed to the upper chamber and into the presence of his fellow apostles, exclaiming in breathless excitement, "I have seen the Master. He was in the garden. I talked with him, and he has forgiven me." Peter's declaration that he had seen Jesus in the garden made a profound impression upon his fellow apostles, and they were about ready to surrender their doubts when Andrew got up and warned them not to be too much influenced by his brother's report. Andrew intimated that Peter had seen things which were not real before. Although Andrew did not directly allude to the vision of the night on the Sea of Galilee, wherein Peter claimed to have seen the Master coming to them walking on the water, he said enough to betray to all present that he had this incident in mind. Simon Peter was very much hurt by his brother's insinuations, and immediately lapsed into crestfallen silence. The twins felt very sorry for Peter, and they both went over to express their sympathy, and to say that they believed him, and to reassert that their own mother had also seen the Master. 2. First appearance to the apostles. Shortly after 9 o'clock that evening, after the departure of Cleopas and Jacob, while the Alphaeus twins comforted Peter, and while Nathanael remonstrated with Andrew, and as the 10 apostles were there assembled in the upper chamber with all the doors bolted for fear of arrest, the Master, in Urantia form, suddenly appeared in the midst of them, saying, "Peace be upon you. Why are you so frightened when I appear, as though you had seen a spirit? Did I not tell you about these things when I was present with you in the flesh? Did I not say to you that the chief priests and the rulers would deliver me up to be killed, that one of your own number would betray me, and that on the third day I would rise? Wherefore all your doubtings and all this discussion about the reports of the women, Cleopas and Jacob, and even Peter? How long will you doubt my words and refuse to believe my promises? And now that you actually see me, will you believe? Even now one of you is absent. When you are gathered together once more, and after all of you know of a certainty that the Son of Man has risen from the grave, go hence into Galilee. Have faith in God, have faith in one another, and so shall you enter into the new service of the kingdom of heaven. I will tarry in Jerusalem with you until you are ready to go into Galilee. My peace I leave with you." When the Urantia Jesus had spoken to them, he vanished in an instant from their sight, and they all fell on their faces, praising God and venerating their vanished Master. This was the Master's 9th Urantia appearance. 3. With the Urantia creatures. The next day, Monday, was spent wholly with the Urantia creatures then present on Urantia. As participants in the Master's Urantia transition experience, there had come to Urantia more than 1 million Urantia directors and associates, together with transition mortals of various orders from the 7 mansion worlds of Satania. The Urantia Jesus sojourned with these splendid intelligences for 40 days. He instructed them and learned from the directors the life of Urantia transition, as it is traversed by the mortals of the inhabited worlds of Satania, as they pass through the system Urantia spheres. About midnight of this Monday, the Master's Urantia form was adjusted for transition to the 2nd stage of Urantia progression. When he next appeared to his mortal children on earth, it was as a 2nd stage Urantia being. As the Master progressed in the Urantia career, it became, technically, more and more difficult for the Urantia intelligences and their transforming associates to visualize the Master to mortal and material eyes. Jesus made the transit to the 3rd stage of Urantia on Friday, April 14, to the 4th stage on Monday, the 17th, to the 5th stage on Saturday, the 22nd, to the 6th stage on Thursday, the 27th, to the 7th stage on Tuesday, May 2, to Jerusalem citizenship on Sunday, the 7th, and he entered the embrace of the Most Highs of Edentia on Sunday, the 14th. In this manner did Michael of Nebadon complete his service of universe experience, since he had already, in connection with his previous bestowals, experienced to the full the life of the ascendant mortals of time and space from the sojourn on the headquarters of the constellation, even on to and through the service of the headquarters of the super-universe. And it was by these very Urantia experiences that the Creator's Son of Nebadon really finished and acceptably terminated his 7th and final universe bestowal. 4. The 10th appearance at Philadelphia. The 10th Urantia manifestation of Jesus to mortal recognition occurred a short time after 8 o'clock on Tuesday, April 11, at Philadelphia, where he showed himself to Abner and Lazarus and some 150 of their associates, including more than 50 of the evangelistic corps of the 70. This appearance occurred just after the opening of a special meeting in the synagogue, which had been called by Abner to discuss the crucifixion of Jesus and the more recent report of the resurrection, which had been brought by David's messenger. Inasmuch as the resurrected Lazarus was now a member of this group of believers, it was not difficult for them to believe the report that Jesus had risen from the dead. The meeting in the synagogue was just being opened by Abner and Lazarus, who were standing together in the pulpit, when the entire audience of believers saw the form of the Master appear suddenly. He stepped forward from where he had appeared between Abner and Lazarus, neither of whom had observed him, and saluting the company said, "Peace be upon you. You all know that we have one Father in heaven, and that there is but one gospel of the kingdom, the good news of the gift of eternal life, which men receive by faith. As you rejoice in your loyalty to the gospel, pray the Father of truth to shed abroad in your hearts a new and greater love for your brethren. You are to love all men as I have loved you. You are to serve all men as I have served you. With understanding sympathy and brotherly affection, fellowship all your brethren who are dedicated to the proclamation of the good news, whether they be Jew or Gentile, Greek or Roman, Persian or Ethiopian." John proclaimed the kingdom in advance. "You have preached the gospel in power. The Greeks already teach the good news, and I am soon to send forth the Spirit of truth into the souls of all these, my brethren, who have so unselfishly dedicated their lives to the enlightenment of their fellows who sit in spiritual darkness. You are all the children of light. Therefore stumble not into the misunderstanding entanglements of mortal suspicion and human intolerance. If you are ennobled by the grace of faith to love unbelievers, should you not also equally love those who are your fellow believers in the far-spreading household of faith? Remember, as you love one another, all men will know that you are my disciples. Go then into all the world, proclaiming this gospel of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of men to all nations and races, and ever be wise in your choice of methods for presenting the good news to the different races and tribes of mankind. Freely you have received this gospel of the kingdom, and you will freely give the good news to all nations. Fear not the resistance of evil, for I am with you always, even to the end of the ages, and my peace I leave with you." When he had said, "My peace I leave with you," he vanished from their sight. With the exception of one of his appearances in Galilee, where upward of 500 believers saw him at one time, this group in Philadelphia embraced the largest number of mortals who saw him on any single occasion. Early the next morning, even while the apostles tarried in Jerusalem awaiting the emotional recovery of Thomas, these believers at Philadelphia went forth proclaiming that Jesus of Nazareth had risen from the dead. The next day, Wednesday, Jesus spent without interruption in the society of his Urantia associates, and during the mid-afternoon hours he received visiting Urantia delegates from the mansion worlds of every local system of inhabited spheres throughout the constellation of Norlashadek. And they all rejoiced to know their Creator as one of their own order of universe intelligence. 5. Second appearance to the apostles. Thomas spent a lonesome week alone with himself in the hills around about Olivet. During this time he saw only those at Simon's house and John Mark. It was about 9 o'clock on Saturday, April 15, when the two apostles found him and took him back with them to their rendezvous at the Mark home. The next day Thomas listened to the telling of the stories of the Master's various appearances, but he steadfastly refused to believe. He maintained that Peter had enthused them into thinking they had seen the Master. Nathanael reasoned with him, but it did no good. There was an emotional stubbornness associated with his customary doubtfulness, and this state of mind, coupled with his chagrin at having run away from them, conspired to create a situation of isolation which even Thomas himself did not fully understand. He had withdrawn from his fellows, he had gone his own way, and now even when he was back among them, he unconsciously tended to assume an attitude of disagreement. He was slow to surrender. He disliked to give in. Without intending it, he really enjoyed the attention paid him. He derived unconscious satisfaction from the efforts of all his fellows to convince and convert him. He had missed them for a full week, and he obtained considerable pleasure from their persistent attentions. They were having their evening meal a little after 6 o'clock, with Peter sitting on one side of Thomas and Nathanael on the other, when the doubting apostle said, "I will not believe unless I see the Master with my own eyes and put my finger in the mark of the nails." As they thus sat at supper, and while the doors were securely shut and barred, the Urantia master suddenly appeared inside the curvature of the table, and standing directly in front of Thomas said, "Peace be upon you. For a full week I have tarried, that I might appear again when you were all present to hear once more the commission to go into all the world and preach this gospel of the kingdom. Again I tell you, as the Father sent me into the world, so send I you. As I have revealed the Father, so shall you reveal the divine love, not merely with words, but in your daily living. I send you forth not to love the souls of men, but rather to love men. You are not merely to proclaim the joys of heaven, but also to exhibit in your daily experience these spirit realities of the divine life, since you already have eternal life as the gift of God through faith. When you have faith, when power from on high, the Spirit of truth, has come upon you, you will not hide your light here behind closed doors. You will make known the love and the mercy of God to all mankind. Through fear, you now flee from the facts of a disagreeable experience. But when you shall have been baptized with the Spirit of truth, you will bravely and joyously go forth to meet the new experiences of proclaiming the good news of eternal life in the kingdom of God. You may tarry here and in Galilee for a short season, while you recover from the shock of the transition from the false security of the authority of traditionalism to the new order of the authority of facts, truth, and faith in the supreme realities of living experience. Your mission to the world is founded on the fact that I lived a God-revealing life among you, on the truth that you and all other men are the sons of God, and it shall consist in the life which you will live among men, the actual and living experience of loving men and serving them, even as I have loved and served you. Let faith reveal your light to the world. Let the revelation of truth open the eyes blinded by tradition. Let your loving service effectually destroy the prejudice engendered by ignorance. By so drawing close to your fellow men in understanding sympathy and with unselfish devotion, you will lead them into a saving knowledge of the Father's love. The Jews have extolled goodness. The Greeks have exalted beauty. The Hindus preach devotion. The far-away ascetics teach reverence. The Romans demand loyalty. But I require of my disciples life, even a life of loving service for your brothers in the flesh." When the Master had so spoken, he looked down into the face of Thomas and said, "And you, Thomas, who said you would not believe unless you could see me and put your finger in the nail marks of my hands, have now beheld me and heard my words. And though you see no nail marks on my hands, since I am raised in the form that you also shall have when you depart from this world, what will you say to your brethren? You will acknowledge the truth, for already in your heart you had begun to believe, even when you so stoutly asserted your unbelief. Your doubts, Thomas, always most stubbornly assert themselves, just as they are about to crumble. Thomas, I bid you be not faithless, but believing, and I know you will believe, even with a whole heart. When Thomas heard these words, he fell on his knees before the Urantia master and exclaimed, "I believe, my Lord and my Master." Then said Jesus to Thomas, "You have believed, Thomas, because you have really seen and heard me. Blessed are those in the ages to come who will believe even though they have not seen with the eye of flesh, nor heard with the mortal ear." And then, as the Master's form moved over near the head of the table, he addressed them all, saying, "And now, go all of you to Galilee, where I will presently appear to you." After he said this, he vanished from their sight. The 11 apostles were now fully convinced that Jesus had risen from the dead, and very early the next morning, before the break of day, they started out for Galilee. 6. The Alexandrian Appearance. While the 11 apostles were on the way to Galilee, drawing near their journey's end, on Tuesday evening, April 18, at about 8:30 o'clock, Jesus appeared to Rhodan and some 80 other believers in Alexandria. This was the Master's 12th appearance in Urantia form. Jesus appeared before these Greeks and Jews at the conclusion of the report of David's messenger regarding the crucifixion. This messenger, being the 5th in the Jerusalem-Alexandria relay of runners, had arrived in Alexandria late that afternoon, and when he had delivered his message to Rhodan, it was decided to call the believers together to receive this tragic word from the messenger himself. At about 8 o'clock, the messenger, Nathan of Bucyrus, came before this group and told them in detail all that had been told him by the preceding runner. Nathan ended his touching recital with these words, "But David, who sends us this word, reports that the Master, in foretelling his death, declared that he would rise again." Even as Nathan spoke, the Urantia master appeared there in full view of all, and when Nathan sat down, Jesus said, "Peace be upon you. That which my Father sent me into the world to establish belongs not to a race, a nation, nor to a special group of teachers or preachers. This gospel of the kingdom belongs to both Jew and Gentile, to rich and poor, to free and bond, to male and female, even to the little children. And you are all to proclaim this gospel of love and truth by the lives which you live in the flesh. You shall love one another with a new and startling affection, even as I have loved you. You will serve mankind with a new and amazing devotion, even as I have served you. And when men see you so love them, and when they behold how fervently you serve them, they will perceive that you have become faith-fellows of the kingdom of heaven, and they will follow after the Spirit of truth, which they see in your lives, to the finding of eternal salvation. As the Father sent me into this world, even so now send I you. You are all called to carry the good news to those who sit in darkness. This gospel of the kingdom belongs to all who believe it. It shall not be committed to the custody of mere priests. Soon will the Spirit of truth come upon you, and he shall lead you into all truth. Go you, therefore, into all the world, preaching this gospel, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the ages." When the Master had so spoken, he vanished from their sight. All that night these believers remained there together, recounting their experiences as kingdom believers, and listening to the many words of Rhodan and his associates. And they all believed that Jesus had risen from the dead. Imagine the surprise of David's herald of the resurrection, who arrived the second day after this, when they replied to his announcement, saying, "Yes, we know, for we have seen him. He appeared to us day before yesterday."
Paper 192. Appearances in Galilee. By the time the apostles left Jerusalem for Galilee, the Jewish leaders had quieted down considerably. Since Jesus appeared only to his family of kingdom believers, and since the apostles were in hiding and did no public preaching, the rulers of the Jews concluded that the gospel movement was, after all, effectually crushed. They were, of course, disconcerted by the increasing spread of rumors that Jesus had risen from the dead, but they depended upon the bribed guards effectively to counteract all such reports by their reiteration of the story that a band of his followers had removed the body. From this time on, until the apostles were dispersed by the rising tide of persecution, Peter was the generally recognized head of the apostolic corps. Jesus never gave him any such authority, and his fellow apostles never formally elected him to such a position of responsibility. He naturally assumed it and held it by common consent, and also because he was their chief preacher. From now on, public preaching became the main business of the apostles. After their return from Galilee, Matthias, whom they chose to take the place of Judas, became their treasurer. During the week they tarried in Jerusalem, Mary, the mother of Jesus, spent much of the time with the women believers who were stopping at the home of Joseph of Arimathea. Early this Monday morning, when the apostles departed for Galilee, John Mark went along. He followed them out of the city, and when they had passed well beyond Bethany, he boldly came up among them, feeling confident they would not send him back. The apostles paused several times on the way to Galilee to tell the story of their risen Master, and therefore did not arrive at Bethsaida until very late on Wednesday night. It was noontime on Thursday before they were all awake and ready to partake of breakfast. 1. Appearance by the lake. About 6 o'clock Friday morning, April 21, the Urantia master made his 13th appearance, the first in Galilee, to the 10 apostles as their boat drew near the shore, close to the usual landing place at Bethsaida. After the apostles had spent the afternoon and early evening of Thursday in waiting at the Zebedee home, Simon Peter suggested that they go fishing. When Peter proposed the fishing trip, all of the apostles decided to go along. All night they toiled with the nets, but caught no fish. They did not much mind the failure to make a catch, for they had many interesting experiences to talk over, things which had so recently happened to them at Jerusalem. But when daylight came, they decided to return to Bethsaida. As they neared the shore, they saw someone on the beach near the boat landing standing by a fire. At first they thought it was John Mark, who had come down to welcome them back with their catch. But as they drew nearer the shore, they saw they were mistaken. The man was too tall for John. It had occurred to none of them that the person on the shore was the Master. They did not altogether understand why Jesus wanted to meet with them amidst the scenes of their earlier associations and out in the open in contact with nature, far away from the shut-in environment of Jerusalem with its tragic associations of fear, betrayal, and death. He had told them that if they would go into Galilee, he would meet them there, and he was about to fulfill that promise. As they dropped anchor and prepared to enter the small boat for going ashore, the man on the beach called to them, "Lads, have you caught anything?" And when they answered no, he spoke again. "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find fish." While they did not know it was Jesus who had directed them, with one accord they cast in the net as they had been instructed, and immediately it was filled, so much so that they were hardly able to draw it up. Now John Zebedee was quick of perception, and when he saw the heavy-laden net, he perceived that it was the Master who had spoken to them. When this thought came into his mind, he leaned over and whispered to Peter, "It is the Master." Peter was ever a man of thoughtless action and impetuous devotion. So when John whispered this in his ear, he quickly arose and cast himself into the water, that he might the sooner reach the Master's side. His brethren came up close behind him, having come ashore in the small boat, hauling the net of fishes after them. By this time John Mark was up, and seeing the apostles coming ashore with the heavy-laden net, ran down the beach to greet them. And when he saw 11 men instead of 10, he surmised that the unrecognized one was the risen Jesus. And as the astonished 10 stood by in silence, the youth rushed up to the Master and, kneeling at his feet, said, "My Lord and my Master." And then Jesus spoke, not as he had in Jerusalem when he greeted them with "Peace be upon you," but in commonplace tones he addressed John Mark. "Well, John, I am glad to see you again, and in carefree Galilee where we can have a good visit. Stay with us, John, and have breakfast." As Jesus talked with the young man, the 10 were so astonished and surprised that they neglected to haul the net of fish in upon the beach. Now spoke Jesus, "Bring in your fish and prepare some for breakfast. Already we have the fire and much bread." While John Mark had paid homage to the Master, Peter had for a moment been shocked at the sight of the coals of fire glowing there on the beach. The scene reminded him so vividly of the midnight fire of charcoal in the courtyard of Annas, where he had disowned the Master. But he shook himself, and kneeling at the Master's feet, exclaimed, "My Lord and my Master." Peter then joined his comrades as they hauled in the net. When they had landed their catch, they counted the fish, and there were 153 large ones. And again was the mistake made of calling this another miraculous catch of fish. There was no miracle connected with this episode. It was merely an exercise of the Master's pre-knowledge. He knew the fish were there, and accordingly directed the apostles where to cast the net. Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Come now, all of you, to breakfast. Even the twins should sit down while I visit with you. John Mark will dress the fish." John Mark brought 7 good-sized fish, which the Master put on the fire, and when they were cooked the lads served them to the 10. Then Jesus broke the bread and handed it to John, who in turn served it to the hungry apostles. When they had all been served, Jesus bade John Mark sit down while he himself served the fish and the bread to the lad. And as they ate, Jesus visited with them and recounted their many experiences in Galilee and by this very lake. This was the 3rd time Jesus had manifested himself to the apostles as a group. When Jesus first addressed them, asking if they had any fish, they did not suspect who he was, because it was a common experience for these fishermen on the Sea of Galilee, when they came ashore, to be thus accosted by the fish merchants of Tarichea, who were usually on hand to buy the fresh catches for the drying establishments. Jesus visited with the 10 apostles and John Mark for more than an hour, and then he walked up and down the beach talking with them 2 and 2, but not the same couples he had at first sent out together to teach. All 11 of the apostles had come down from Jerusalem together, but Simon Zelotes grew more and more despondent as they drew near Galilee, so that when they reached Bethsaida, he forsook his brethren and returned to his home. Before taking leave of them this morning, Jesus directed that 2 of the apostles should volunteer to go to Simon Zelotes and bring him back that very day, and Peter and Andrew did so. 2. Visiting with the apostles 2 and 2. When they had finished breakfast, and while the others sat by the fire, Jesus beckoned to Peter and to John that they should come with him for a stroll on the beach. As they walked along, Jesus said to John, "John, do you love me?" And when John answered, "Yes, Master, with all my heart," the Master said, "Then, John, give up your intolerance and learn to love men as I have loved you. Devote your life to proving that love is the greatest thing in the world. It is the love of God that impels men to seek salvation. Love is the ancestor of all spiritual goodness, the essence of the true and the beautiful." Jesus then turned toward Peter and asked, "Peter, do you love me?" Peter answered, "Lord, you know I love you with all my soul." Then said Jesus, "If you love me, Peter, feed my lambs. Do not neglect to minister to the weak, the poor, and the young. Preach the gospel without fear or favor. Remember always that God is no respecter of persons. Serve your fellow men even as I have served you. Forgive your fellow mortals even as I have forgiven you. Let experience teach you the value of meditation and the power of intelligent reflection." After they had walked along a little farther, the Master turned to Peter and asked, "Peter, do you really love me?" And then said Simon, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And again said Jesus, "Then take good care of my sheep. Be a good and a true shepherd to the flock. Betray not their confidence in you. Be not taken by surprise at the enemy's hand. Be on guard at all times. Watch and pray." When they had gone a few steps farther, Jesus turned to Peter and for the 3rd time asked, "Peter, do you truly love me?" And then Peter, being slightly grieved at the Master's seeming distrust of him, said with considerable feeling, "Lord, you know all things, and therefore do you know that I really and truly love you?" Then said Jesus, "Feed my sheep. Do not forsake the flock. Be an example and an inspiration to all your fellow shepherds. Love the flock as I have loved you, and devote yourself to their welfare, even as I have devoted my life to your welfare. And follow after me even to the end." Peter took this last statement literally, that he should continue to follow after him, and turning to Jesus, he pointed to John, asking, "If I follow on after you, what shall this man do?" And then, perceiving that Peter had misunderstood his words, Jesus said, "Peter, be not concerned about what your brethren shall do. If I will that John should tarry after you are gone, even until I come back, what is that to you? Only make sure that you follow me." This remark spread among the brethren and was received as a statement by Jesus to the effect that John would not die before the Master returned, as many thought and hoped, to establish the kingdom in power and glory. It was this interpretation of what Jesus said that had much to do with getting Simon Zelotes back into service and keeping him at work. When they returned to the others, Jesus went for a walk and talk with Andrew and James. When they had gone a short distance, Jesus said to Andrew, "Andrew, do you trust me?" And when the former chief of the apostles heard Jesus ask such a question, he stood still and answered, "Yes, Master, of a certainty I trust you, and you know that I do." Then said Jesus, "Andrew, if you trust me, trust your brethren more, even Peter. I once trusted you with the leadership of your brethren. Now must you trust others as I leave you to go to the Father. When your brethren begin to scatter abroad because of bitter persecutions, be a considerate and wise counselor to James my brother in the flesh when they put heavy burdens upon him, which he is not qualified by experience to bear. And then go on trusting, for I will not fail you. When you are through on earth, you shall come to me." Then Jesus turned to James, asking, "James, do you trust me?" And of course James replied, "Yes, Master, I trust you with all my heart." Then said Jesus, "James, if you trust me more, you will be less impatient with your brethren. If you will trust me, it will help you to be kind to the brotherhood of believers. Learn to weigh the consequences of your sayings and your doings. Remember that the reaping is in accordance with the sowing. Pray for tranquility of spirit and cultivate patience. These graces with living faith shall sustain you when the hour comes to drink the cup of sacrifice. But never be dismayed. When you are through on earth, you shall also come to be with me." Jesus next talked with Thomas and Nathanael. Said he to Thomas, "Thomas, do you serve me?" Thomas replied, "Yes, Lord, I serve you now and always." Then said Jesus, "If you would serve me, serve my brethren in the flesh, even as I have served you. And be not weary in this well-doing, but persevere as one who has been ordained by God for this service of love. When you have finished your service with me on earth, you shall serve with me in glory. Thomas, you must cease doubting. You must grow in faith and the knowledge of truth. Believe in God like a child, but cease to act so childishly. Have courage. Be strong in faith and mighty in the kingdom of God." Then said the Master to Nathanael, "Nathanael, do you serve me?" And the apostle answered, "Yes, Master," and with an undivided affection. Then said Jesus, "If therefore you serve me with a whole heart, make sure that you are devoted to the welfare of my brethren on earth with tireless affection. Admix friendship with your counsel, and add love to your philosophy. Serve your fellow men even as I have served you. Be faithful to men as I have watched over you. Be less critical. Expect less of some men, and thereby lessen the extent of your disappointment. And when the work down here is over, you shall serve with me on high." After this the Master talked with Matthew and Philip. To Philip he said, "Philip, do you obey me?" Philip answered, "Yes, Lord, I will obey you even with my life." Then said Jesus, "If you would obey me, go then into the lands of the Gentiles and proclaim this gospel. The prophets have told you that to obey is better than to sacrifice. By faith have you become a God-knowing kingdom son. There is but one law to obey. That is the command to go forth proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. Cease to fear men. Be unafraid to preach the good news of eternal life to your fellows who languish in darkness and hunger for the light of truth. No more, Philip, shall you busy yourself with money and goods. You now are free to preach the glad tidings just as are your brethren, and I will go before you and be with you even to the end." And then, speaking to Matthew, the Master asked, "Matthew, do you have it in your heart to obey me?" Matthew answered, "Yes, Lord, I am fully dedicated to doing your will." Then said the Master, "Matthew, if you would obey me, go forth to teach all peoples this gospel of the kingdom. No longer will you serve your brethren the material things of life. Henceforth you are also to proclaim the good news of spiritual salvation. From now on have an eye single only to obeying your commission to preach this gospel of the Father's kingdom. As I have done the Father's will on earth, so shall you fulfill the divine commission. Remember, both Jew and Gentile are your brethren. Fear no man when you proclaim the saving truths of the gospel of the kingdom of heaven, and where I go, you shall presently come." Then he walked and talked with the Alphaeus twins, James and Judas, and speaking to both of them he asked, "James and Judas, do you believe in me?" And when they both answered, "Yes, Master, we do believe," he said, "I will soon leave you. You see that I have already left you in the flesh. I tarry only a short time in this form before I go to my Father. You believe in me. You are my apostles, and you always will be. Go on believing and remembering your association with me when I am gone, and after you have, perchance, returned to the work you used to do before you came to live with me. Never allow a change in your outward work to influence your allegiance. Have faith in God to the end of your days on earth. Never forget that, when you are a faith son of God, all upright work of the realm is sacred. Nothing which a son of God does can be common. Do your work, therefore, from this time on, as for God. And when you are through on this world, I have other and better worlds where you shall likewise work for me. And in all of this work, on this world and on other worlds, I will work with you, and my Spirit shall dwell within you." It was almost 10 o'clock when Jesus returned from his visit with the Alphaeus twins, and as he left the apostles he said, "Farewell until I meet you all on the mount of your ordination tomorrow at noontime." When he had thus spoken, he vanished from their sight. 3. On the Mount of Ordination. At noon on Saturday, April 22, the 11 apostles assembled by appointment on the hill near Capernaum, and Jesus appeared among them. This meeting occurred on the very mount where the Master had set them apart as his apostles and as ambassadors of the Father's kingdom on earth, and this was the Master's 14th Urantia manifestation. At this time the 11 apostles knelt in a circle about the Master and heard him repeat the charges and saw him reenact the ordination scene even as when they were first set apart for the special work of the kingdom. And all of this was to them as a memory of their former consecration to the Father's service, except the Master's prayer. When the Master, the Urantia Jesus, now prayed, it was in tones of majesty and with words of power such as the apostles had never before heard. Their Master now spoke with the rulers of the universes as one who, in his own universe, had had all power and authority committed to his hand. And these 11 men never forgot this experience of the Urantia rededication to the former pledges of ambassadorship. The Master spent just 1 hour on this mount with his ambassadors, and when he had taken an affectionate farewell of them, he vanished from their sight. And no one saw Jesus for a full week. The apostles really had no idea what to do, not knowing whether the Master had gone to the Father. In this state of uncertainty they tarried at Bethsaida. They were afraid to go fishing lest he come to visit them and they miss seeing him. During this entire week Jesus was occupied with the Urantia creatures on earth and with the affairs of the Urantia transition which he was experiencing on this world. 4. The Lakeside Gathering. Word of the appearances of Jesus was spreading throughout Galilee, and every day increasing numbers of believers arrived at the Zebedee home to inquire about the Master's resurrection and to find out the truth about these reputed appearances. Peter, early in the week, sent out word that a public meeting would be held by the seaside the next Sabbath at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Accordingly, on Saturday, April 29, at 3 o'clock, more than 500 believers from the environs of Capernaum assembled at Bethsaida to hear Peter preach his first public sermon since the resurrection. The apostle was at his best, and after he had finished his appealing discourse, few of his hearers doubted that the Master had risen from the dead. Peter ended his sermon saying, "We affirm that Jesus of Nazareth is not dead. We declare that he has risen from the tomb. We proclaim that we have seen him and talked with him." Just as he finished making this declaration of faith, there by his side, in full view of all these people, the Master appeared in Urantia form, and speaking to them in familiar accents, said, "Peace be upon you, and my peace I leave with you." When he had thus appeared and had so spoken to them, he vanished from their sight. This was the 15th Urantia manifestation of the risen Jesus. Because of certain things said to the 11 while they were in conference with the Master on the Mount of Ordination, the apostles received the impression that their Master would presently make a public appearance before a group of the Galilean believers, and that after he had done so, they were to return to Jerusalem. Accordingly, early the next day, Sunday, April 30, the 11 left Bethsaida for Jerusalem. They did considerable teaching and preaching on the way down the Jordan, so that they did not arrive at the home of the Marks in Jerusalem until late on Wednesday, May 3. This was a sad homecoming for John Mark. Just a few hours before he reached home, his father, Elijah Mark, suddenly died from a hemorrhage in the brain. Although the thought of the certainty of the resurrection of the dead did much to comfort the apostles in their grief, at the same time they truly mourned the loss of their good friend, who had been their staunch supporter even in the times of great trouble and disappointment. John Mark did all he could to comfort his mother, and speaking for her, invited the apostles to continue to make their home at her house. And the 11 made this upper chamber their headquarters until after the day of Pentecost. The apostles had purposely entered Jerusalem after nightfall that they might not be seen by the Jewish authorities. Neither did they publicly appear in connection with the funeral of Elijah Mark. All the next day they remained in quiet seclusion in this eventful upper chamber. On Thursday night, the apostles had a wonderful meeting in this upper chamber, and all pledged themselves to go forth in the public preaching of the new gospel of the risen Lord, except Thomas, Simon Zelotes, and the Alphaeus twins. Already had begun the first steps of changing the gospel of the kingdom, sonship with God and brotherhood with man, into the proclamation of the resurrection of Jesus. Nathanael opposed this shift in the burden of their public message, but he could not withstand Peter's eloquence, neither could he overcome the enthusiasm of the disciples, especially the women believers. And so, under the vigorous leadership of Peter, and ere the Master ascended to the Father, his well-meaning representatives began that subtle process of gradually and certainly changing the religion of Jesus into a new and modified form of religion about Jesus.
Paper 193. Final Appearances and Ascension. The 16th Urantia manifestation of Jesus occurred on Friday, May 5, in the courtyard of Nicodemus, about 9 o'clock at night. On this evening the Jerusalem believers had made their first attempt to get together since the resurrection. Assembled here at this time were the 11 apostles, the women's corps and their associates, and about 50 other leading disciples of the Master, including a number of the Greeks. This company of believers had been visiting informally for more than half an hour when suddenly the Urantia Master appeared in full view and immediately began to instruct them. Said Jesus, "Peace be upon you." This is the most representative group of believers, apostles and disciples, both men and women, to which I have appeared since the time of my deliverance from the flesh. I now call you to witness that I told you beforehand that my sojourn among you must come to an end. I told you that presently I must return to the Father. And then I plainly told you how the chief priests and the rulers of the Jews would deliver me up to be put to death, and that I would rise from the grave. Why then did you allow yourselves to become so disconcerted by all this when it came to pass? And why were you so surprised when I rose from the tomb on the third day? You failed to believe me because you heard my words without comprehending the meaning thereof. And now you should give ear to my words, lest you again make the mistake of hearing my teaching with the mind, while in your hearts you fail to comprehend the meaning. From the beginning of my sojourn as one of you, I taught you that my one purpose was to reveal my Father in heaven to his children on earth. I have lived the God-revealing bestowal that you might experience the God-knowing career. I have revealed God as your Father in heaven. I have revealed you as the sons of God on earth. It is a fact that God loves you, his sons. By faith in my word, this fact becomes an eternal and living truth in your hearts. When, by living faith, you become divinely God-conscious, you are then born of the Spirit as children of light and life, even the eternal life wherewith you shall ascend the universe of universes and attain the experience of finding God the Father on paradise. I admonish you ever to remember that your mission among men is to proclaim the gospel of the kingdom, the reality of the fatherhood of God, and the truth of the sonship of man. Proclaim the whole truth of the good news, not just a part of the saving gospel. Your message is not changed by my resurrection experience. Sonship with God, by faith, is still the saving truth of the gospel of the kingdom. You are to go forth preaching the love of God and the service of man. That which the world needs most to know is, men are the sons of God, and through faith they can actually realize and daily experience this ennobling truth. My bestowal should help all men to know that they are the children of God, but such knowledge will not suffice if they fail personally to faith grasp the saving truth that they are the living Spirit sons of the Eternal Father. The gospel of the kingdom is concerned with the love of the Father and the service of his children on earth. Among yourselves here you share the knowledge that I have risen from the dead, but that is not strange. I have the power to lay down my life and to take it up again. The Father gives such power to his paradise sons. You should the rather be stirred in your hearts by the knowledge that the dead of an age entered upon the eternal ascent soon after I left Joseph's new tomb. I lived my life in the flesh to show how you can, through loving service, become God-revealing to your fellow men, even as, by loving you and serving you, I have become God-revealing to you. I have lived among you as the Son of Man, that you and all other men might know that you are all indeed the sons of God. Therefore go you now into all the world, preaching this gospel of the kingdom of heaven to all men. Love all men as I have loved you. Serve your fellow mortals as I have served you. Freely you have received, freely give. Only tarry here in Jerusalem while I go to the Father, and until I send you the Spirit of truth. He shall lead you into the enlarged truth, and I will go with you into all the world. I am with you always, and my peace I leave with you. When the Master had spoken to them, he vanished from their sight. It was near daybreak before these believers dispersed. All night they remained together, earnestly discussing the Master's admonitions and contemplating all that had befallen them. James Zebedee and others of the apostles also told them of their experiences with the Urantia Master in Galilee, and recited how he had 3 times appeared to them. 1. The appearance at Sychar. About 4 o'clock on Sabbath afternoon, May 13, the Master appeared to Nalda and about 75 Samaritan believers near Jacob's well at Sychar. The believers were in the habit of meeting at this place, near where Jesus had spoken to Nalda concerning the water of life. On this day, just as they had finished their discussions of the reported resurrection, Jesus suddenly appeared before them, saying, "Peace be upon you. You rejoice to know that I am the resurrection and the life. But this will avail you nothing unless you are first born of the eternal Spirit, thereby coming to possess, by faith, the gift of eternal life. If you are the faith sons of my Father, you shall never die. You shall not perish. The gospel of the kingdom has taught you that all men are the sons of God. And this good news concerning the love of the Heavenly Father for His children on earth must be carried to all the world. The time has come when you worship God neither on Gerizim nor at Jerusalem, but where you are, as you are, in spirit and in truth. It is your faith that saves your souls. Salvation is the gift of God to all who believe they are His sons. But be not deceived. While salvation is the free gift of God and is bestowed upon all who accept it by faith, there follows the experience of bearing the fruits of this spirit life as it is lived in the flesh. The acceptance of the doctrine of the fatherhood of God implies that you also freely accept the associated truth of the brotherhood of man. And if man is your brother, he is even more than your neighbor, whom the Father requires you to love as yourself. Your brother, being of your own family, you will not only love with a family affection, but you will also serve as you would serve yourself. And you will thus love and serve your brother, because you, being my brethren, have been thus loved and served by me. Go then into all the world, telling this good news to all creatures of every race, tribe, and nation. My Spirit shall go before you, and I will be with you always." These Samaritans were greatly astonished at this appearance of the Master, and they hastened off to the nearby towns and villages, where they published abroad the news that they had seen Jesus, and that He had talked to them. And this was the 17th Morantia appearance of the Master. 2. The Phoenician appearance. The Master's 18th Morantia appearance was at Tyre on Tuesday, May 16, at a little before 9 o'clock in the evening. Again He appeared at the close of a meeting of believers, as they were about to disperse, saying, "Peace be upon you. You rejoice to know that the Son of Man has risen from the dead, because you thereby know that you and your brethren shall also survive mortal death. But such survival is dependent on your having been previously born of the Spirit of truth-seeking and God-finding. The bread of life and the water thereof are given only to those who hunger for truth and thirst for righteousness, for God. The fact that the dead rise is not the gospel of the kingdom. These great truths and these universe facts are all related to this gospel in that they are a part of the result of believing the good news, and are embraced in the subsequent experience of those who, by faith, become, in deed and in truth, the everlasting sons of the eternal God. My Father sent me into the world to proclaim this salvation of sonship to all men. And so send I you abroad to preach this salvation of sonship. Salvation is the free gift of God, but those who are born of the Spirit will immediately begin to show forth the fruits of the Spirit in loving service to their fellow creatures. And the fruits of the divine Spirit which are yielded in the lives of Spirit-born and God-knowing mortals are loving service, unselfish devotion, courageous loyalty, sincere fairness, enlightened honesty, undying hope, confiding trust, merciful ministry, unfailing goodness, forgiving tolerance, and enduring peace. If professed believers bear not these fruits of the divine Spirit in their lives, they are dead. The Spirit of truth is not in them. They are useless branches on the living vine, and they soon will be taken away. My Father requires of the children of faith that they bear much Spirit fruit. If therefore you are not fruitful, He will dig about your roots and cut away your unfruitful branches. Increasingly must you yield the fruits of the Spirit as you progress heavenward in the kingdom of God. You may enter the kingdom as a child, but the Father requires that you grow up, by grace, to the full stature of spiritual adulthood. And when you go abroad to tell all nations the good news of this gospel, I will go before you, and my Spirit of truth shall abide in your hearts. My peace I leave with you. And then the Master disappeared from their sight. The next day there went out from Tyre those who carried this story to Sidon and even to Antioch and Damascus. Jesus had been with these believers when he was in the flesh, and they were quick to recognize him when he began to teach them. While his friends could not readily recognize his Urantia form when made visible, they were never slow to identify his personality when he spoke to them. 3. Last appearance in Jerusalem. Early Thursday morning, May 18, Jesus made his last appearance on earth as a Urantia personality. As the 11 apostles were about to sit down to breakfast in the upper chamber of Mary Mark's home, Jesus appeared to them and said, "Peace be upon you. I have asked you to tarry here in Jerusalem until I ascend to the Father, even until I send you the Spirit of truth, who shall soon be poured out upon all flesh, and who shall endow you with power from on high." Simon Zelotes interrupted Jesus, asking, "Then, Master, will you restore the kingdom, and will we see the glory of God manifested on earth?" When Jesus had listened to Simon's question, he answered, "Simon, you still cling to your old ideas about the Jewish Messiah and the material kingdom. But you will receive spiritual power after the Spirit has descended upon you, and you will presently go into all the world preaching this gospel of the kingdom. As the Father sent me into the world, so do I send you. And I wish that you would love and trust one another. Judas is no more with you, because his love grew cold, and because he refused to trust you, his loyal brethren. Have you not read in the Scripture where it is written, 'It is not good for man to be alone. No man lives to himself'? And also where it says, 'He who would have friends must show himself friendly'? And did I not even send you out to teach 2 and 2, that you might not become lonely and fall into the mischief and miseries of isolation? You also well know that when I was in the flesh, I did not permit myself to be alone for long periods. From the very beginning of our associations, I always had 2 or 3 of you constantly by my side, or else very near at hand, even when I communed with the Father. Trust, therefore, and confide in one another. And this is all the more needful, since I am this day going to leave you alone in the world. The hour has come. I am about to go to the Father." When he had spoken, he beckoned for them to come with him, and he led them out on the Mount of Olives, where he bade them farewell, preparatory to departing from Urantia. This was a solemn journey to Olivet. Not a word was spoken by any of them from the time they left the upper chamber until Jesus paused with them on the Mount of Olives. 4. Causes of Judas's downfall. It was in the first part of the Master's farewell message to his apostles that he alluded to the loss of Judas and held up the tragic fate of their traitorous fellow worker as a solemn warning against the dangers of social and fraternal isolation. It may be helpful to believers, in this and in future ages, briefly to review the causes of Judas's downfall in the light of the Master's remarks and in view of the accumulated enlightenment of succeeding centuries. As we look back upon this tragedy, we conceive that Judas went wrong primarily because he was very markedly an isolated personality, a personality shut in and away from ordinary social contacts. He persistently refused to confide in or freely fraternize with his fellow apostles. But his being an isolated type of personality would not, in and of itself, have wrought such mischief for Judas had it not been that he also failed to increase in love and grow in spiritual grace. And then, as if to make a bad matter worse, he persistently harbored grudges and fostered such psychologic enemies as revenge and the generalized craving to get even with somebody for all his disappointments. This unfortunate combination of individual peculiarities and mental tendencies conspired to destroy a well-intentioned man who failed to subdue these evils by love, faith, and trust. That Judas need not have gone wrong is well proved by the cases of Thomas and Nathaniel, both of whom were cursed with this same sort of suspicion and overdevelopment of the individualistic tendency. Even Andrew and Matthew had many leanings in this direction, but all these men grew to love Jesus and their fellow apostles more and not less as time passed. They grew in grace and in a knowledge of the truth. They became increasingly more trustful of their brethren and slowly developed the ability to confide in their fellows. Judas persistently refused to confide in his brethren. When he was impelled by the accumulation of his emotional conflicts to seek relief in self-expression, he invariably sought the advice and received the unwise consolation of his unspiritual relatives or those chance acquaintances who were either indifferent or actually hostile to the welfare and progress of the spiritual realities of the heavenly kingdom, of which he was one of the 12 consecrated ambassadors on earth. Judas met defeat in his battles of the earth struggle because of the following factors of personal tendencies and character weakness. 1. He was an isolated type of human being. He was highly individualistic and chose to grow into a confirmed shut-in, an unsociable sort of person. 2. As a child, life had been made too easy for him. He bitterly resented thwarting. He always expected to win. He was a very poor loser. 3. He never acquired a philosophic technique for meeting disappointment. Instead of accepting disappointments as a regular and commonplace feature of human existence, he unfailingly resorted to the practice of blaming someone in particular, or his associates as a group, for all his personal difficulties and disappointments. 4. He was given to holding grudges. He was always entertaining the idea of revenge. 5. He did not like to face facts frankly. He was dishonest in his attitude toward life situations. 6. He disliked to discuss his personal problems with his immediate associates. He refused to talk over his difficulties with his real friends and those who truly loved him. In all the years of their association, he never once went to the Master with a purely personal problem. 7. He never learned that the real rewards for noble living are, after all, spiritual prizes, which are not always distributed during this one short life in the flesh. As a result of his persistent isolation of personality, his griefs multiplied, his sorrows increased, his anxieties augmented, and his despair deepened almost beyond endurance. While this self-centered and ultra-individualistic apostle had many psychic, emotional, and spiritual troubles, his main difficulties were, in personality, he was isolated. In mind, he was suspicious and vengeful. In temperament, he was surly and vindictive. Emotionally, he was loveless and unforgiving. Socially, he was unconfiding and almost wholly self-contained. In spirit, he became arrogant and selfishly ambitious. In life, he ignored those who loved him, and in death he was friendless. These, then, are the factors of mind and influences of evil which, taken all together, explain why a well-meaning and otherwise one-time sincere believer in Jesus, even after several years of intimate association with his transforming personality, forsook his fellows, repudiated a sacred cause, renounced his holy calling, and betrayed his divine Master. 5. The Master's Ascension. It was almost 7:30 this Thursday morning, May 18, when Jesus arrived on the western slope of Mount Olivet with his 11 silent and somewhat bewildered apostles. From this location, about 2/3 the way up the mountain, they could look out over Jerusalem and down upon Gethsemane. Jesus now prepared to say his last farewell to the apostles before he took leave of Urantia. As he stood there before them, without being directed, they knelt about him in a circle. And the Master said, "I bade you tarry in Jerusalem until you were endowed with power from on high. I am now about to take leave of you. I am about to ascend to my Father, and soon, very soon, will we send into this world of my sojourn the Spirit of truth. And when he has come, you shall begin the new proclamation of the gospel of the kingdom, first in Jerusalem, and then to the uttermost parts of the world. Love men with the love wherewith I have loved you, and serve your fellow mortals, even as I have served you. By the Spirit fruits of your lives impel souls to believe the truth that man is a son of God, and that all men are brethren. Remember all I have taught you, and the life I have lived among you. My love overshadows you, my Spirit will dwell with you, and my peace shall abide upon you. Farewell." When the Morantia master had thus spoken, he vanished from their sight. This so-called ascension of Jesus was in no way different from his other disappearances from mortal vision during the 40 days of his Morantia career on Urantia. The Master went to Urantia by way of Jerusalem, where the Most Highs, under the observation of the Paradise Sun, released Jesus of Nazareth from the Morantia state, and through the spirit channels of ascension, returned him to the status of Paradise Sonship and supreme sovereignty on Salvington. It was about 7:45 this morning when the Morantia Jesus disappeared from the observation of his 11 apostles to begin the ascent to the right hand of his Father, there to receive formal confirmation of his completed sovereignty of the universe of Nebadon. 6. Peter calls a meeting. Acting upon the instruction of Peter, John, Mark, and others went forth to call the leading disciples together at the home of Mary Mark. By 10:30, 120 of the foremost disciples of Jesus living in Jerusalem had foregathered to hear the report of the farewell message of the Master and to learn of his ascension. Among this company was Mary, the mother of Jesus. She had returned to Jerusalem with John Zebedee when the apostles came back from their recent sojourn in Galilee. Soon after Pentecost she returned to the home of Salome at Bethsaida. James, the brother of Jesus, was also present at this meeting, the first conference of the Master's disciples to be called after the termination of his planetary career. Simon Peter took it upon himself to speak for his fellow apostles and made a thrilling report of the last meeting of the 11 with their Master, and most touchingly portrayed the Master's final farewell and his ascension disappearance. It was a meeting the like of which had never before occurred on this world. This part of the meeting lasted not quite 1 hour. Peter then explained that they had decided to choose a successor to Judas Iscariot, and that a recess would be granted to enable the apostles to decide between the 2 men who had been suggested for this position, Matthias and Justus. The 11 apostles then went downstairs, where they agreed to cast lots in order to determine which of these men should become an apostle to serve in Judas's place. The lot fell on Matthias, and he was declared to be the new apostle. He was duly inducted into his office and then appointed treasurer. But Matthias had little part in the subsequent activities of the apostles. Soon after Pentecost, the twins returned to their homes in Galilee. Simon Zelotes was in retirement for some time before he went forth preaching the gospel. Thomas worried for a shorter period and then resumed his teaching. Nathanael differed increasingly with Peter regarding preaching about Jesus in the place of proclaiming the former gospel of the kingdom. This disagreement became so acute by the middle of the following month that Nathanael withdrew, going to Philadelphia to visit Abner and Lazarus. And after tarrying there for more than a year, he went on into the lands beyond Mesopotamia, preaching the gospel as he understood it. This left but 6 of the original 12 apostles to become actors on the stage of the early proclamation of the gospel in Jerusalem: Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, and Matthew. Just about noon the apostles returned to their brethren in the upper chamber and announced that Matthias had been chosen as the new apostle. And then Peter called all of the believers to engage in prayer that they might be prepared to receive the gift of the Spirit which the Master had promised to send.